It's not a super common question, but it gets brought up enough and I never know how to answer it. So let's make a video on this today, thanks to Jerry here recommending it. He says, kind of off topic, but needs mentioning. The item level minimum requirement per key sounds like a video that could be made out of it with enough info on it. Now, I assume what he's talking about is the common question that gets asked all the time. What do you think item level wise I need to do for a certain key level? And we're going to go ahead and branch that out a bit to also what does the DPS need to look like, okay? Because these are two common questions that get asked all the time. And the answer, like the TLDR answer, is it doesn't work that way. That's usually what I say because it's the easiest way to answer it while I'm streaming. But yeah, it's kind of more like a 30-minute answer here. So let's get to it. So the way I look at success, and now this is mostly going to be for pugging, okay? But I think, you know, this could be no matter what you're doing in 5-mans. There's the same info there to be understood. So in 5-mans, well, let's talk about my background on why I think it's like this, okay? In raiding, people like have for historically set like minimum item levels to come to their raid group. You know what I mean? Like if you're not 252, then you shouldn't be doing heroic raid or something right now. You know what I mean? It's just like a number I can imagine people are using, and it makes sense. But most of that is just like a social thing. Like, I mean, there's no actual requirement. So I want that to be very clear, okay? There is no requirement. And I wonder if there's people out there who think there is. Because when you're queuing for like LFR or a heroic dungeon or something like this, there is actually a requirement, right? So like in the very, very beginning of the season, you're not geared enough, not the season, but the expansion, you're not geared enough to queue for heroic dungeons, which are just going to be a stepping stone anyway. So what we'd always do is we always just fly out there and do them like, you know, in person if we needed gear from them instead. And so, you know, people maybe are thinking that. I don't know how many people would be in that boat because that really only happens for like a week at the start of an expansion every 2 years. So, but yeah, there is other content in the game that does have an actual requirement, like a literal hard requirement. Mythic Plus obviously does not work like that. You can enter that naked if you wanted. And I honestly think, I've been saying this for a while, kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I honestly think you could upgrade keys naked. And let me explain to you why I think that. Because like in a raid, there's a variable that is very tightly controlled, and that's the health pool of the boss and the health pool that you need to have to survive that boss. Okay, those two things are incredibly tightly controlled. Blizzard is not just haphazardly slapping numbers on those things. They know exactly how long a like 20 million boss health is supposed to take you as a 20-player raid. You know what I mean? They know exactly how long that's going to take. And they know exactly how much damage that's going to do, so how much health pool and HPS you will need to survive that. You know, that's why a lot of fights have this ticking kind of healing chart on it. You know what I mean? It's just like a passive 1000 DPS or something like that on the raid that you just have to heal through. Because they want a certain HPS number to be met, and when they make the fight, they realize it's not being met by the mechanics, and the core mechanics of the fight can't be altered. So instead of trying to redesign the encounter late into the process, they just add a blanket amount of damage the fight does to keep the HPS numbers higher. And this is how they design that content. Now, I do not believe they designed that content, this type of stuff, into Mythic Plus, because Mythic Plus has a lot more variables. And even if they did, you know, I can't imagine they would ever do a perfect job of it. And so you need to understand that. Like in a raid situation, if everybody's doing 10k DPS, then the boss dies in 5 minutes, right? That's just the number. Well, if you have one guy doing 7k DPS, then the boss dies in like 5 minutes, 20 seconds, and that might be overly enraged. You know what I mean? So those numbers are there, and they're easily understood. They're mathematically obvious. You could do basic mathematics and understand that just by looking at the boss's health pool. But in 5-mans, it doesn't work that way at all. Like, it's the complete opposite, right? Because in 5-mans, you're timed. Everything is timed. There's no enrages. Everything is just timed. And if you... and so to beat an enrage in a fight, the only option is to kill the boss, right? In a raid boss, you have to beat its health pool. And there's a variety of ways you can, increase your DPS and uptime and use CDs and lust better, but there's nothing else that you can do, right? The only way to beat a boss's timer is to beat the health pool of that encounter. Once that starts, you have a set period of time to kill the boss, and if you don't, you fail. But again, in 5-mans, more variables than just kill the boss. You know what I mean? Don't just break HP pools. You also have to run around. You have to figure out what you're skipping. You have to figure out what you're dealing with that doesn't need to be killed. You have to figure out how you're navigating the dungeon, okay? So I hope that's like step 0 on this conversation, because I don't know how many people fully grasp that. Like, they're not the same. So if you've ever heard anybody say, you must be this item level to do this content, and they're talking about raids, that's why, okay? If they're talking about 5-mans, they're just kind of dumb. They're just not really very intelligent, because it just doesn't matter, okay? There's very, very, very little opportunity in 5-mans for item level to matter. So let's talk about why item level might matter in other content, besides what we just talked about with the whole rating thing and the numerical numbers here. It still doesn't really matter there, because you could be 270 item level and still be doing less DPS than somebody who's 250 item level. But there's another factor to item level that I don't think a lot of people fully understand or really think about. Because especially if you play a damage dealer, you're going to be looking at your sims or whatever that stuff is, and you're going to see a number that's going to be based on the DPS, right? And so I remember the first time I ever dealt with this. It was in Siege of Orgrimmar. We had multiple people using tier set from Throne of Thunder, which was like 30 item levels lower, okay? So wearing, I don't know if it was 2 or 4 pieces, but wearing multiple pieces that were 30 item levels lower while we're doing a boss that is just absolutely challenging our health pool every step of the way. And I was like, dude, you gotta, like, I mean, you got 30k less health. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what the numbers were back then, but like they had like 20% less health than every other DPS. I was like, we got to do something about this, man. And he's like, yeah, I can't help you, man. My DPS, it's like, did the Sims say that this gear is better? But the Sims are not accounting for the stamina on the gear, which also goes up per item level. Okay, so this is quickly turning into a rating video, it sounds like. But I will say that it's important to understand that when you're wearing gear, it has more than just offensive stats on it. And nowhere should that be more true than in 5-mans, because in 5-mans, your health pool can be challenged in unconventional ways. I mean, I literally think about this all the time. When you do the other side and those spirit fire things shoot across you and you get one shot, you know what I mean? That's like a massive error. I see people do that all the time, where they literally get one shot by that thing. And it's probably, I assume it's scaling on Keystone level, but it makes me realize it's like, yo, that guy's probably under geared. You know what I mean? If you get one shot by that fire, you're under geared for that dungeon. That's just kind of something that I've noticed that throughout the season. I'm like, you're not geared enough for this content. Now, obviously, that's 100% avoidable. You wouldn't believe it based on how many people get hit by it, but I always just think about it like that. It's like, that's Blizzard's clever little way of saying, like, yo, if you got hit by this and didn't survive, you don't have enough health pool. And so both of those things can factor in heavily in 5-man. Whether or not you have the gear to output enough damage and you have the gear to survive. The good thing about item level is that you probably, if you're asking this question or you want to hear my opinion on this question, you probably are not going to maximize that gear. Let's just be serious. I'm in that boat too. None of us are perfect. Almost none of us. Maybe 1 or 2 people. But no, a few of us are perfect, but most of us are not perfect. And we are not going to be able to maximize that gear. So being like 252 item level or whatever, that's cool. But reality, we're probably playing more like a 245 person at times. You know what I mean? Distractions, breaking rotational chains, like certain mistakes. You know what I'm saying? But that health pool doesn't lie. There's nothing you can do wrong with that health pool. That health pool goes up no matter what. And it goes up in a fixed amount. You know what I mean? And so for Blood DK, that's why I've always prioritized that kind of thing. Health pool and haste have always been my best friends because they allow me to make mistakes and not fail to them. Make a mistake, recover from it, you've succeeded. Make no mistakes, you've still succeeded. It's the same output, But anyway, so keep that in mind, all right? So when we're talking about item level, I think almost nobody would be talking about health pool, but there's just going to be like this base layer of health that you do need for all keys. And again, that does not actually function as a requirement. In raid, it might. You know, if you don't have enough health pool, you literally might not be able to survive certain mechanics. But in a dungeon situation, a lot of things are dodgeable. Like a lot more stuff is avoidable than on any type of boss in a raid. So I think a lot of people probably don't recognize that fact. And you get hit by a lot of stuff in a dungeon. You might look at your overall damage taken. I would say probably like your average player, probably about like 30-40% of that stuff is actually dodgeable or in some way preventable. Like if you use a defensive CD at the right time, you will not take damage from X attack. You know what I mean? And we can go on for an hour about that. But so let's get back to the fundamental question here. What item level do I need to do this certain key? The answer is that's completely irrelevant, because the only thing that really matters is your experience and your skill level. That's it. Okay? Now, those variables can be tweaked, could be like turned until infinity. You know what I mean? If you're an insanely, like if you designed the content, right? Like, I mean, like what would be the number one rank of experience? Like you literally made the content, or you like are some existential being who is part of the code. Like I just think of like the most experience you could ever be, right? And like you understand fundamental elements of how the content works that nobody else could, right? And that you are the supreme god of World of Warcraft, right? If you have those two things turned up all the way to infinity, you could do any dungeon at any item level. Do you understand that? Like literally, it wouldn't matter at all. You could be wearing gear from season 1 of Shadowlands and you could still be upgrading 20s, because there's so many things that you could do in these dungeons. There's so many skips and so much crazy shit. Like if you really get into Mythic Plus and watch some people do stuff, like in the MDI especially, this is where it gets kind of out of control, because they're like way over geared for the content they're doing typically. But like even in the beginning of seasons, like people who are super serious key pushers but they're struggling to upgrade keys because they're still under geared, they do things that are just like mind boggling, and they look to save like seconds on the minute, you know what I mean? And doing that every couple of packs really adds up over the course of a dungeon, where you end up might having a double upgrade where other groups are struggling to get a single upgrade. So there's a lot of like what they call now tech that you can do in 5-mans, where in raid that doesn't exist. You know, that's the big difference, and that's the big reason why the item level thing doesn't exist, because it just doesn't matter how much damage you do, dude. Like it really doesn't. It's going to be more about how the dungeon goes. So when we talked about item level at first, I said we should also talk about DPS requirements. Now that is a lot different, because there are numbers that should be looked at as acceptable per dungeon. But the reason that I usually defer from answering that question is because it's just too hard to say. The dungeons differ. Like if you do a Sanguine Depths versus a Theater of Pain, you are going to be swinging like probably like 20% number wise. You know what I mean? It's a massive difference. So me telling you do 10k overall, well, that doesn't count for every dungeon. You know what I mean? It's a very different situation, and it's different on different affixes. It'll be different with different comps. It'll be different with different routes. It will literally change every single time you do the dungeon. So stop worrying about that. But you will notice that after doing 20-30 keys, you will start to see the same numbers arise, and you will be like, oh, 10k overall, this is pretty good. Oh, that guy did 12k overall, that dude's crushing it. Oh, that guy did 8k overall, oh, he's kind of garbage. You know what I mean? So it's like you can learn these trends, but they're just not important. And it's the same thing with item level. Now, back to the item level topic, I will also say that a lot of people, when pugging, might just be really lazy when they're picking players, okay? So if you list a group right now and you have 15 people sign up, you might look at a varying amount of factors to figure out who you're going to invite. And so the top few I would say would be, one, what class are they? Okay, like if you need Bloodlust, or you think Demon Hunter is better than a monk or something like that, then you might be choosing that. You know what I mean? That might be in your head. The second one, obviously, Raider IO score. Unfortunately, whatever it's Blizzard score now, but like whatever the Mythic Plus score, people are going to be looking at that pretty heavily. And we made a ton of videos on why it's misleading, but the fact of the matter is, it does help make a group, right? Like if you see somebody who's the appropriate accomplishment and they've done a lot of keys in that level, then they're probably qualified for the dungeon. Certainly more so than somebody at a growth scale much lower. The problem is when you start to be like looking at it within like a 20-point difference, it's just completely stupid because they might not even have the dungeon that you're doing. You know what I mean? Like it just doesn't matter. But it is something that people are going to look at. That could be a whole nother video. It pretty much has been already. But then the third thing would be item level. So let's say we want a frost mage. Okay, we have a frost mage in the queue who's he's 2,500 right now. Just got Keystone Master. He is you know, playing exactly what we want. We want him to be whatever covenant, and he looks like the perfect candidate. But he's only 249 item level. Okay, so here's some theoretical situations. So he's 249 item level. Okay, now we have another frost mage in the queue. Well, he's the exact same. He's got he's let's just say he's just slightly under Keystone Master here. He's like 2449 or something like that. And he has the same covenant. We have everything we need from him. But he is 262 item level. He is like 20, maybe like 15 item levels higher than the other guy. So let's explore this theoretical situation. So we have one guy who is actually slightly more accomplished, but is way less geared. So what does that mean? That can mean one of two things, okay? One, that dude is crushing it. Like, he is playing so high above what his character's output should look like that he is a guaranteed slam dunk pick. You know what I mean? Or two, could mean that he kind of got lucky on the climb. You know, it depends on what level we're talking about. If we're talking about somebody who's like 5K score and he's 249, then that dude's a stud, right? Like, you can't get carried to that high, whatever the number would be. But if he's like, you know, just kind of right at that kind of push line right now where a lot of people are at, yeah, he could have been unlucky with gear, or maybe he just kind of getting carried through a lot of keys, which is really easy to do as a mage, honestly. You know what I mean? So DPS can get carried all the time. So do you invite that guy, or do you take the guy who's slightly less accomplished but is more geared? And to me, I think I take the guy who's more geared, and that's number one because just if you assume they both suck, right? Like, I mean, I always just do that. I was just like, okay, what's the lowest common denominator here that we can get by with? This guy's gonna be playing at like 20% percentile, 20 percentile, whatever. It's like, yeah, fine, okay, do like 8K overall. Well, the guy who's 262, just because he has slightly more gear, is just going to do like 8.5K overall. You know what I mean? Like, he's just going to be slightly better. So gear is kind of like this great equalizer in that way. You know what I mean? Where it's just like a really cheap way out. It's like, okay, that guy's super geared. Just go with him. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't really even care. He's probably shit. It has no correlation on skill, obviously. Complete, especially in 2 weeks into the season. It's just complete randomness. There's almost no, I mean, unless you're killing mythic raid bosses somehow right now, you're not really going to be any more geared than anyone else is for 5-man. So, but that might occur, okay? And you could tweak any of those things again, but it's always going to come down to experience and skill, and that is not something that you can gain by looking at any of those factors we just talked about: item level, gear, or item level, class, you know, stuff like that, and Raider IO Mythic Plus score. None of those things tell you anything about skill and experience, okay? They could have a semblance of a picture, but they will never tell you the full story there, okay? So try not to hang your hat on any one thing. And so to close this topic here, I would like to tell you a little bit about why I usually refuse to answer this question, or I put in a very basic, too simple answer, okay? Because I don't want you to be misled into thinking that when you get to 260 item level, you're suddenly going to succeed in this game. And I don't, like, I think that might be in people's heads. Like, why else are you asking that? To me, it seems very obvious that you know, with all these variables, with the timer and the trash count and the bosses being fortified or tyrannical and affixes, and it's just so many variables and keys. Like, to me, there's no way a natural, like, if you have done any of that, the natural question would never be, what item level do I need to be to do this dungeon? It's so freaking obvious to me, and maybe, you know, I just think about this. I obviously have been doing keys for like 10 years now, basically, since Mythic Plus, or since challenge mode, but it's like, it's so clear to me that number of your character's item level just doesn't matter whatsoever. It's just so apparently obvious to me that I would never ask that question. So I kind of think, why would they ask that question? And my answer to myself would be that they think that they can get to a certain item level and then be on the other side of a peak of a progression point. Because I used to be like that too. I remember, in the very early days of WoW, I would always think like, okay, I really want to do this content. Well, let me just go and get every BOE on the auction house and go and get all this content from easier stuff. And then I'd just be as geared as humanly possible. And it was almost like this checkbox in my mind that like, yo, I suck. And so the only way I'm going to not suck is by get this arbitrary power that my character might not even make full use of. And then everybody around me will be convinced into thinking I don't suck, even though I know I do. And it was like I was tricking myself, And so I think there's probably still some of that mentality out there today where people are like, please, I just don't want to get declined from keys anymore. Or please, I just want to upgrade 15s, I just want to be able to do 15s for the weekly. What item level do I need to be? What item level do I need to be where people will accept me to keys? And so that has nothing to do with it. Not a damn thing. And just quickly on the accepting to keys thing, if that's in your head, go every once in a while, I recommend doing this. Go and list a Necrotic Wake 15 right now and see how many DPS sign up. Do it like on a Monday night, dude. I could not believe I was doing 15s on Monday night. To help people, and it was like 100 people signing. It was unbelievable. I've never seen, and this is on Alliance, I've never seen so many people signing up last Monday trying to list a 15 because everybody and their brother was trying to get more credit right at the end of the week, right? It was insane. So you can only bring 3 damage dealers, so there is a 0% chance that you can ever guarantee you'll get invited to a group, because even if you're super overqualified for a group, gear wise, skill wise, you might be one of the best players in the world. I don't want to play with you. I don't want that dude in my group. You know what I mean? I don't want that ego hanging over me. I don't want that pressure. You know what I mean? So I'm going to take an average player over a great player, and I'm going to take a sub-average player almost never, So anyway, but yeah, I think that's really important to understand. And I don't want you to believe that I can help you get better by just telling you some number. You know what I mean? I don't want to be like, oh yeah, you should be doing 10k overall right now, or you should be doing you should be 260 item level. I don't want to tell somebody that, because then they might do it. They might put all their focus, instead of learning the dungeons, instead of learning routes and using your CDs better and where to skip and where to do these things, instead of learning the actual intricacies of the 5-man, you're going to be like, well, hey, I did 10k overall. I'd take, you know what? Fuck you guys. Honestly, 10k overall, bro. I did it. I met my minimum requirement. So you guys suck. We didn't upgrade the key. It's not my fault. You know what I mean? Like, I would say this all the time. If you do a full key with 0 deaths and you don't upgrade that key, then start worrying about variables. That's the only variable you should worry about. How about you ask me that question? How about next time you ask a question, ask how many deaths should I have in a dungeon? It's the only thing that actually really matters. Like the only numeric, not score, not item level, not skill, not IQ, not anything else. Literally height, weight, it doesn't matter, dude. None of that matters. I don't care what division you fight in the UFC. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. How many deaths do you have in that dungeon? In the dungeon you're about to do, 0 deaths, pro. You're great. You know what I mean? If you have 0 deaths in a dungeon, that means everything went perfect. You have double-digit dungeon deaths, you suck, dude. That's just fact. I don't care if you're a 2.9k score player and you normally upgrade 28s. If you come into a dungeon with no fucking clue and you die like crazy and you have no idea what you're doing, you suck. That's just how I look at it, okay? And if you come into a dungeon and you are completely aware of your own health pool and you use defensive CDs well and you avoid deaths even in calamitous moments when like a tank dies and you manage to pull it back together, rock alley, frost trap, all this stuff, you kite and you live, then you're a fucking pro. Like that's just it. You know what I mean? If you avoid deaths even in calamitous moments, you save keys, dude. And that's the only thing that matters. So stop worrying about these stupid numerical requirements that you think exist. They do not exist. All right? They do not exist. The only requirement is that you're alive for the entire dungeon. Because when you're dead, you're doing very, very, very little DPS. Very little. I mean, I would say 0, but I know some classes can still leave dots and stuff on. But it's so absurd to me that people don't understand this. That the first question is, how can I get better at the dungeon? That's never the question. It's always like, how can I meet some arbitrary like statistic that the game doesn't even ask about when you're doing keys? I think they could just literally remove the item level column in Mythic Plus, and that it would lead to the same success rate, because it's just so irrelevant. There's so many other variables and factors. But anyway, I hope that helps, because again, I do not want anybody sitting out there thinking like, oh, once I'm 260 item level, I'm skilled. You know what I mean? There's so many other ways to learn, and I have so much. I have literally thousands of hours of stuff here on this channel. So I really hope it will help, and I will continue to make more. I'll continue to do everything in my power to help you guys. But it just always kind of breaks my heart when I see people come in and ask that question. I almost think, like, I have to admit, like, when I see that question, I'm almost like, that guy's not going to be helpable. Like, I just can't help that guy, because in like the most nuanced content, there's never been content with this many variables in it. Maybe PvP, I guess, but that's literally for like 12-year-olds. I don't even know who PvP is anymore. But anyway, in real game play, in PvE, where the real players play, I'm just kidding. No, in PvE, there's never been more nuanced content. Like, I don't actually think at any point in this game has there ever been, maybe like if you're trying to speed run leveling in Classic, there's a lot of variables too, right? But in 5-mans, it's so many different. There's the fixes, there's what class and comp you have, cohesion of group, like, are you guys together in Discord? There's just so many different ways that you can improve your success. And so for you to take like the most basic way out to say like, hey, what item level do I need? Hopefully now, after watching this video, anybody who's on the fence about that understands that. And I don't want to say that I don't ever want to hear this question again, but I'm certainly going to be referring anybody to this video from now on. And I really want people to understand this. Like, it will be the best thing that you've ever done, that you understand that the only things you should be worrying about is your experience and your skill. And the more experience you have, the easier it'll be to be skilled. And the more skill you have, the more you could offset experience. And that's why, to me, it's so absurd when you see these people who are highly accomplished based on the Blizzard metrics come in and make fools out of themselves. Because that tells me that they skipped one of those two things. They might be skilled, but they might have no experience. They might have no experience, but they have no skill. And they are not, they have to be both. You have to have both, dude. If you want to succeed in stressful, timed content that gets harder and harder the higher levels you go, you need to not only be able to predict failures and outplay them, but you have to be able to survive them and make calamities not complete catastrophes, not complete wipes, not disbands. That is how you succeed in dungeons. And obviously this is easier from the tank role, but it certainly is very possible from the healer role. And DPS have a factor in it too, because using like core spells like Ice Block and immunities or utility in general, this is why keys succeed. DPS is great. Go do 12k overall, have fun, have a blast, pretend like you're doing something crazy, which you probably are at a lot of times. But if you die a ton, you know what I mean? If you charge in and rip threat on the pack and then type a question mark, you suck. That's just the way I look at it, all right? So thank you for watching. Hope this has helped. We will see you guys in the next one.